My name is Pat Bridges. I'm from Snowboarder magazine, and this is Permanent Ink. With Snowboarder in its 30th year producing magazines, we've created Permanent Ink, which is a broad strokes look back at the history of snowboarding media and how it has evolved and what trends have come into play over the last 4 decades of snowboarding. We are at the Volcom headquarters here in Southern California, and they've got a vast archive of magazines for us to pick through to kind of give you guys a look back at how the sport has evolved as far as on the printed page and the role of magazines in that evolution. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Permanent Ink. Today I'm joined by Volcom team rider and New Hampshire legend Pat Moore.
Hello, sir.
Today we're going to talk about mid-90s and on and some of the happenings in the media world, and in particular like the effect videos had on snowboarding media as a whole.
Yeah.
Well, a big shift happened in the latter part of the 90s where, video started to really become the dominant media. Mm-hmm. And then on the flip side of that, we also started to enter into an age where, you could watch snowboarding on television, first via the X Games and then later via the Olympics. So snowboarding was no longer fringe, it was pretty much mainstream. I mean, the minute they allowed snowboarding in the Olympics, everybody knew what it was.
Yeah, it was really interesting to get started then when it was like still kind of on the fringe, and then really just like 5 years later, it was like Cool Boarders was a video game. There were action figures, like, people were in the Olympics, X Games was huge, so there's like a major shift from outlaw sport to full mainstream professionalism,
Yeah. So with videos becoming more of, driving force in the media, the print magazines adapted. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the notion was like, hey, if people are able to sit there and watch a video over and over and study the tricks, let's give them the same experience or close to it as we can in print.
Yeah. Yeah, it became a lot more about the tricks, definitely. Yeah. I remember, like, looking through mags, and I would just flip right through a still frame. All I wanted to see was the sequence to, like, really see the trick, and I wanted to see how he landed, how he took off, all that stuff. Sequences was kind of the video for me of magazines. It was just like, that's how you learned to do tricks, was just studying the sequences.
Well, even before my time, you started to see a lot of video grabs in the magazines. Mm-hmm. And video grabs are basically where you hook a deck up to a computer and you pause it and you screen capture just different elements of a video. Mm-hmm. It was expensive shooting film. You had to pay for the film. You had to pay for the developing. There was a physical mass that you were paying for. There was an economy to it, and so video grabs became a practical way to show tricks in print. Mm-hmm.
So this around 98, I would say anywhere from like 96 to 98 was when I really started paying attention to snowboard magazines and becoming a fan. And 98 was a big year because Decade came out, and this became a thing, the Forum 8. And Forum just captivated everyone's attention. That was like, it changed snowboarding, really, for me. And that's when I became like a mega fan. and really it was like that team and a couple of select riders that just, it went from I was a regular snowboarder who was interested in the pros and stuff like that to just becoming a total fanboy, was when the Forum team really blew up. And it was like Simple Pleasures was my first video I was interested in, Decade, and then what would it have been?
Resistance.
Resistance. No, not Resistance. Technical Difficulties.
Yeah.
And Tech D came out, and we watched that like to the point where the VHS stopped working.
Yeah.
You know, so those were my like was the era that I look back on. Like that was
Forum,
epic.
just like everything else, Forum changed the game in every aspect of snowboarding, and it was all driven by hype.
Mm-hmm. I think what the brands figured out was it's yeah, you can have the best rider, but if you don't have the best photographer capturing what they're doing, that what that rider's doing isn't going to get seen, or the best filmer or whatever. You know, like these magazines aren't only about the riding, but it's about beautiful imagery and art and photography. So it was kind of like the late 90s was when the brands started to really recognize that. Burton probably had figured it out way before that with like Jeff Curtis, Kevin Zacher, Blotto, those guys. Like, but for Forum and all these other brands, that's when they started to hire staff photographers, staff filmers, who were the best of the industry, and that made a massive difference for those brands in the content that they were putting out, the coverage they were getting in the mags.
Yeah, and it was open to anybody who could do it. Like Ride hires Andy Wright,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and he is, you know, the best.
Yeah.
You know, Trevor. It's no different than Trevor Graves, who's a legendary photographer, was a snowboarder senior, shooting with Morrow because he worked for Morrow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is nothing new. It's not rocket science. It's not like these guys created the game. It's just that these guys dedicated their resources to play the game better than anybody else.
Now I understand it's like it's almost more about the photographer than it is the rider. So that's where a lot of that came from, you know?
Yeah. You know, once towards the late 90s, snowboarding had moved away from its, you know, rebel stage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once you become part of the Olympics, you know, all bets are pretty much off. But so when you look through the magazines and it's the boom years, you're seeing thick magazines that are like 400 or 500 pages, and it's
Look at this.
and it's because people are, you know, when Calvin Klein calls up, you're not charging Calvin Klein what you're charging Burton.
Right.
You know, so I mean, it was a windfall. It was a payday. But at the same time, at what cost? Snowboarding eroded a lot of its culture.
There's just so much money during that time. People were just like, and print was the only way to advertise. So they just started throwing money at print and then also at events, you know?
Yeah. But when I look at this, both Transworld and Snowboarder through that turbulent time, while we were critical, we had a cynicism when it came to the mainstream commoditization of snowboarding.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who benefited from that, as far as the riders, we never hated the player, only the game.
Mhm.
You know.
Well, I think there is a really big shift around 2001, 2002, where when 2002 happened and the Olympics catapulted snowboarding to like the next level, just because of the American sweep, you know, Ross, JJ, and Danny. It really changed.
And Kelly winning. For the
And
girls.
Kelly, yeah, it really changed a lot. But I think one of the bigger, you know, for me growing up, it was like the Forum guys. That was the Forum era. Was like the end, the late '90s, early 2000s, and then right around 2001, 2002, Grenade era. It went from like very professional Forum team, you know, very not clean cut, but very well documented and
Contrived.
yeah, well put together, to the Grenade era where it was complete chaos.
I think Grenade was a bit of a counterpoint to the. It was the repercussion of what was happening with snowboarding going to the Olympics and the mainstream commoditization of snowboarding. The repercussion of that was Grenade and us sitting there saying, hey, this harkens back to a simpler time in snowboarding when it was us against them. It's like Bluebird saying it was better when you hated us. That's basically, Grenade was taking it back for, the outcasts that we once were. Once ski areas were like, oh man, we can make a lot of money off of these guys. We're like, well, you want to make money off of us? Well, payback's a bitch. Here you go. We're gonna make you regret taking our dollars. We're gonna make you earn every cent. So then once the Olympics happened and big brands and big sponsorships started coming into play, and all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, now we're in the big leagues here. So let's pump the brakes. Let's hide the chain wallets. Let's stop smoking in the lift lines. Let's really take advantage of this opportunity to really go mainstream. So that's the late 90s. And then all of a sudden, once again, once snowboarding was a commodity and everybody in the mainstream was there, all of a sudden these kids from New Jersey showed up and said, you know what, give us the money, but we're going to take the money on our own terms. And that's the Grenade era, so to speak, in my mind. And it was a perfect storm for them to arrive and regain snowboarding's street cred.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you guys for tuning in and checking out another episode of Permanent Ink with Pat Bridges and Pat Moore.
Yeah. Thank you.